Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 713 through 715, which will cover manga chapters 773 through 775. And here we have more Don Quixote executives going down as the fighting intensifies. So, synopsis. The race is on to defeat Gladius so that Robin can get up to the Flower Garden to help Kuros and Rebecca, as well as Leo and Kabu have to reach Mansherry before Jola can use her newly revealed healing powers of the Chiu fruit to revive the downed executives. And lastly, we come to the epic conclusion to the hard-boiled battle between Senor Pink and Frankie. Alright, so let's get to the differences. So there aren't as many specific instances of differences, but the amount of time that the differences that are included do take up quite a bit of time. So yeah, I guess there are three main ones that I want to talk about. The anime adds a lot of flashbacks to Bartolomeo's sort of memories of Luffy and him becoming obsessed with him, like him getting struck by lightning in Logtown and sort of seeing that moment from Bartolomeo's eyes, as well as several scenes of Bartolomeo watching Luffy fighting in the Colosseum, which is also shown from his perspective as not different from our perspective when we saw it earlier. These are all not present in the manga, and so the fight actually goes a lot more quicker in the manga. Next is the scene where Jola punishes the grunts for dropping Dellinger is added for filler, and there's a lot of filler included with the whole Jola and her grunts trying to figure out Mansherry's powers and all that stuff. In the manga, the first we see of Jola here is when she's already ordering Mansherry to heal the downed executives, and not when they're being carried in. Lastly, the third change is the end of episode 714 and the beginning of 715 has a lot of additional scenes of Luffy taking extra hits from Bellamy, which is never in the manga. And in fact, this whole entire scene just continues with Leo and Mansherry all kind of like, with their little lover spat, I guess you can say. And so yeah, that whole sequence is uninterrupted in the manga, whereas in the anime, not only is there an episode break, but the fact that there's this extra added scenes of maybe 5 minutes worth of scenes added where Luffy's just getting beat down by Bellamy. I mean, overall, this is probably one of the lesser offensive episodes in terms of filler, so I'm not really complaining all that much. So with that, let's get into the episodes themselves. So picking up right where we left off last episode, Robin has just stopped Hakuba to Bartolomeo's delight, and here we see the reality of Cavendish and his sort of condition, I guess you can say. He and Hakuba pretty much are two different entities, similar to the Hulk and Banner, where they banter and argue with one another for control over the body, which is quite funny when they go half and half, which is what this chapter 773 is actually titled. And it seems like an exhausting way to live. And what really cracks me up every time I see this scene is the moment where Cavendish goes, "Okay, it's okay now, please release me," and Robin just justifiably responds, "After just witnessing that, you want me to trust you?" It's pretty funny because it's a very valid response to what she just witnessed. And there's just something so genuine about how Robin answers back, which is so funny because of the absurdity of what we just witnessed. It's such a funny scene. Unfortunately, they can't really just stand there trying to figure out how to navigate this situation with Hakuba. And because Gladius has been pumping air into the cliff face in order to make it explode, which would eventually wipe them all out, Cavendish recommends that they return to the ground for now, but Robin adamantly says that she can't because she can't lose that time in case anything happens to Rebecca up top. And I want to talk about Robin's sort of strong response towards Rebecca because it's something that is fairly obvious but often overlooked about Robin's character and her role in Dressrosa. On the surface, you wonder why Robin is so worried about protecting Rebecca. They've only just recently met for the first time, and she knows that Kuros already went up ahead to help Rebecca, so why is Robin so desperate to get up to Rebecca, even at the risk of Gladius blowing her up, essentially? And this all ties back into how Oda has positioned Dressrosa, the arc itself, to mirror the Arabasta arc. And after learning the story of what happened to Dressrosa from the Tontatta and Kuros, I can only imagine that Robin immediately saw the same similarities that we all saw in what Doflamingo did to what Crocodile was trying to do to Arabasta and nearly succeeding with it. And also, I might add, with Robin's help. And I believe that this entire arc has been working to somewhat atone for the large role that she played in causing so much pain and suffering for Arabasta and Vivi particularly. She sees a kingdom and a royal family who have been suffering at the hands of a Shichibukai and wants to help them this time. And nothing is going to erase the bad things that she did in the past, but Robin is not a bad person. And now that she has the power and freedom to do as she likes, she's going to do everything in her power to help. And I think she's attached so much meaning behind protecting Rebecca because she knows how much pain she caused Vivi. We will see later on the lengths that Robin is willing to go to protect Rebecca, and I believe that is one of the big reasons why. Anyways, I thought that was a really great character thread for Robin throughout this arc, but getting back to the crisis at hand with Bartolomeo, he tries to take out the source, which is Gladius, but he gets caught off guard and takes a couple paralysis poison needles to his legs, which brings him to his knees. Then, in order to create an unwinnable situation, Gladius inflates himself to an insane level to ensure that if Bartolomeo attacks him, that he'll explode, sending needles up to Robin and Cavendish. But if he does nothing, the cliff will then explode. And one thing I love about this moment is that with Bartolomeo on his knees in front of an inflated Gladius, the way this is framed, especially in the manga, this is clearly an homage to Oda's idol Akira Toriyama and the famous scene in Dragon Ball during the Cell Saga with Cell inflating himself up to blow up because he can't beat Super Saiyan 2 Gohan. And I believe which was somewhere like, I think it was chapter 412, specifically where Gohan is on his knees after realizing there's no way to save everyone from Cell's self-destruct, while Goku is ready to teleport them away to King Kai's island, or planet I should say, both sacrificing themselves. And I find it really awesome that this chapter/episode contains kind of like a multi-layered homage. One in the real world from Oda to his idol, the late great Akira Toriyama, while in the story itself, Bartolomeo shows homage to his idol, Luffy, with his finishing move that we'll see later on. Bartolomeo also makes a sacrifice by entrapping himself and Gladius in a barrier ball that punctures Gladius inside the ball, causing them to be engulfed in a massive explosion of needles. Unfortunately, Gladius is still alive because his vitals were missed, and the cliff continues to inflate, but Cavendish, using his speed of Hakuba while in the half and half form, he uses the speed of Hakuba while using his Cavendish side to stop Hakuba, allowing them to both safely make it up to the flower garden. This is where you go from really liking Bartolomeo to absolutely loving him, and his dedication to Luffy and the Straw Hats and being our, the fans' surrogate character. I think it's so cool and sweet that Bartolomeo has been practicing to fight like Luffy with his homage Holy Fist, but also, live up to his idol's ideals too. With that, Bartolomeo musters up enough strength to coat his fist in a barrier and launches a Bari Bari no pistol. And I freaking love this moment so much because you really understand what Bartolomeo is feeling because he is us. Like, this is what we would experience if we were in that same position. Just an absolutely amazing episode and moment that Oda wrote to show just how much he honors and feels for Toriyama, because you could easily replace the names in Bartolomeo's internal monologue about how he wants to live up to Luffy, his ideals, with Oda's own feelings of wanting to live up to the legacy of his idol, Toriyama. And this is one of my favorite moments from One Piece because of what it represents in the story, but also what it represents outside of it too. Additionally, also, how I mentioned in the last podcast how similar to Zoro and Sanji, the pair of Bartolomeo and Cavendish, are. Well, the last of this fight, where Bartolomeo says to himself that he never wants to pair up with Cavendish again, is clearly a foreshadow that they will eventually join forces and work together again in the future to no doubt help the Straw Hats, which I find hilarious and awesome because I love that parallel between them and Zoro and Sanji. With both Dellinger and Gladius now out of the picture, we move up to the flower garden where Robin comes in for the save on Rebecca. And I know many people were kind of disappointed that Robin wasn't the one doing the fighting and she was kind of merely there to protect Rebecca. But like I mentioned before, this is perfect for Robin in this arc because of what it means to her and her character to protect Rebecca as a way to atone for her past sins and what she helped do to Vivi. And I think Robin is so freaking cool in this scene. I don't think we've ever seen Robin be this confident and bold, but also there's kind of like this carefreeness to her here that's a bit hard to explain other than to just say she's got kind of a swagger that I don't think we've ever seen from Robin, and I love it. And I hope we get more of this Robin. Like, it's interesting to see her kind of slowly break out of her shell and show more personality as opposed to always being this stoic, reserved, in control character. And I love to see like the more sillier side, the more confident and cocky side, like just more seeing Robin for who she actually is. And I love that progression that you see throughout the series as Robin begins to open up more and more and more. For now, though, we again turn our attention away and see what is happening with Leo and his efforts to save the Tontatta Princess Mansherry. And Jola has been gathering up all the fallen members of the Don Quixote family, and we quickly learn why as we finally get the full reveal of Princess Mansherry. And she is adorably cute, to the point where even the villains can't resist her cuteness overload. But more significantly, her devil fruit powers are revealed, and she may have one of the most useful devil fruits in the entire series. She has the Chiyu Chiyo no Mi, or the Heal fruit. Now, Chiyu means to heal or recover in Japanese, and her tears have the amazing ability to heal injuries, kind of like Phoenix tears. And just fast forwarding a bit, later on, Jola mentions that there is one other aspect to the Chiyu Chiyo fruit that Doflamingo was counting on, and that is its ability to not just heal living things, but can also restore inanimate objects at the cost of the user's lifespan. And Doflamingo was planning on using it to rebuild the Smile Factory. And this is very interesting that for all the healing fruits that Oda has sort of introduced in the series so far, he has given them abilities that allow them to do incredible things, but it comes generally at the cost of the user's life. It really does seem like Oda wants to make sure that he has these abilities available for some purpose later on, but not have them create obvious plot contrivances later on down the line by associating them with extreme consequences and costs associated with using them, and also just how often you can use them. The one exception that so far Oda hasn't really mentioned a weakness to or a cost is the Phoenix fruit that Marco has, so that he can regenerate himself, and the fire itself can also regenerate other people, but we don't know if there's any sort of trade-off to how much he can do that or to what extent he can use it. Now, Jola is a huge piece of trash, though. Good lord. Just slapping and torturing Mansherry to get her to cry so she can heal the other executives is wild. But this explains how Sugar was revived so quickly. But this is really bad if guys like Dellinger, Gladius, Sugar, and Mach Weiss all come back after just being barely beaten by most of the other heroes and allies. And just when all seems lost and the falling executives were about to be showered with the healing tears, Leo and Kabu arrive just in time for Kabu to knock everyone out of the way of the falling tears, and Leo finishes them off by sewing all of them with a technique called the haute couture patchwork. Now, haute couture, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, means expensive fashionable clothes produced by leading fashion houses. But in French, if you take each word individually, it literally just means high sewing. And one thing that I really like about how this finishing pose is drawn in the manga when he does the haute couture patchwork is that Oda kind of invokes a very similar imagery as when Sugar transformed all the Tontatta into toys during their earlier fight in the factory. Kind of sort of like almost payback for Leo and the Tontattas. However, in the anime, it's not quite as noticeable because the camera angle is not quite the same. They capture the similar vibe, but I don't think it quite captures the same homage to the earlier shot of Sugar, like palming everybody and then turning them into toys. And then you see her kind of like squatted down, looking into the ground, while everyone else around, behind her is all affected. One thing I'll say about this scene is I know this was supposed to be tense, but for some reason I didn't feel it at all because I just didn't believe that Oda would revive these guys and that Leo wouldn't arrive in time to save them. So this moment, while great for the characters, didn't really do much for me in the way of building tension and stakes. That could also just be me as an old guy who has grown cynical and just can see like things. But I can imagine this is an amazing scene for younger viewers for sure. But yeah, I was like, there's no way that they're coming back. I mean, they barely beat them the first time, and they are not going to get healed. So it's like, who's going to beat them if they come back? But it would have made for an incredibly tense moment had they been revived. But then again, Dressrosa was already long as it is, so like adding a second round of fighting with these guys would have just taken forever. I do, however, love the little button to close off this set piece, with Mansherry clearly in love with Leo and is overjoyed that he's here to save her, like a knight in shining armor, but Leo instead comments on how she's gained weight, pissing her off, and rightfully so. It seems like this isn't necessarily a Tontatta thing, like how naive and gullible they all are, but based on Kabu's reaction, this is all on Leo, who is just oblivious to Mansherry's feelings towards him, making him very Luffy-esque in terms of their attention to detail when it comes to women, which is none at all. And just like how oblivious Luffy is to Hancock's feelings, Leo seems to be just as oblivious to Mansherry's feelings towards him, which is absolutely hysterical. Now, to round off this set of episodes, we finally get back to the manliest of all manly fights, easily one of the standout fights and moments of the Dressrosa arc. And in fact, when you ask people about what was most memorable in Dressrosa, many people will actually point to this fight and or one other moment that has yet to happen. I mean, there are plenty of great scenes in Dressrosa too. I think this one does stand out in a lot of people's mind, but it's also, over the years, I feel like has gained a little bit less, acclaim, and has kind of gotten a little bit more controversy, I feel like. But anyways, when we do finally return to this fight, Senor Pink and Frankie have been trading blows back and forth 30 times over, apparently, without trying to block or dodge a single one of them. Not necessarily out of some misguided machismo, but the impression I get is more out of respect for each other's toughness. They both want to win head on and see who can outlast the other as a sign of respect for their spirit and code that they're both bringing to this duel. Now, Senor Pink grabs Frankie and sends him high up in the air for what seems like a finishing blow with his meow meow suplex baby buster. But just before landing that devastating attack, Senor Pink mentions about the possibility of seeing his wife Russian and his child named Gimlet if they kept flying up towards the sky as if they were both already dead. But somehow, despite being suplexed into the ground from like 400 feet in the air, Frankie manages to get back up with half of his face ripped off, and with sort of that menacing red eye, and which seems like a clear homage to the Terminator, and specifically Arnold's T-800 Terminator. Frankie manages to get back up after that hit, as true to his word, Senor Pink stands there stout with his arms crossed, ready to now take Frankie's attack. And as Frankie unleashes a flurry of punches with an upgraded version of an attack we haven't seen since essentially his debut in NES Lobby, the Frankie Boxing, except this time it's called the Frankie Iron Boxing, to, I guess, indicate his more mechanical parts that he's gained since the time skip. And it's here, while he's taking all the punches, we get a flashback that kind of changed our perspective on this character. We see Senor Pink's past about how he met his wife Russian and the tragic events that led him to becoming sort of the baby outfitted gangster he is today. They grow to love each other and even get married and have a child, but there's one big wrench in their relationship, and that is that Russian hates pirates more than anything. And unfortunately, that is exactly what Senor Pink is, but he hides it by lying to her and telling her he's a banker. But one day, Senor Pink leaves suddenly for what's probably a job for Doflamingo, and during that time, Gimlet becomes sick and passes away, sadly, which is devastating enough as it is, but then Russian figures out that Senor Pink has been lying to her after trying to call the bank to search for him, and she eventually runs away from him, but gets caught in a mudslide and is left in a vegetative state. And this is where the story takes a turn for kind of the sympathetic for Senor Pink, after he realizes that all he wants now, more than anything, is for Russian to answer him or even just give him a smile again. Then one day he gets the crazy idea to wear the same bonnet that Gimlet wore when he was born, in hopes of reminding her of a happy memory. And at first it doesn't seem to do anything, but to his shock, she cracks the faintest of smiles. And unfortunately, this is where this episode ends, and we don't get to see the conclusion to this flashback till the next episode, which really sucks that they paced this episode so poorly that they couldn't fit it all into one episode like the chapter was. And it's really hard to dive into this flashback and Senor Pink's character without seeing it all. And I will get into it a little bit more on the next podcast episode. But for now, what I will say about this final part is that feeling of not knowing how you should feel about Senor Pink. Like, on the one hand, you're very sympathetic to Senor Pink and really do feel for someone that genuinely loved and cared for his wife and child, but at the same time, this is not a good person. And Oda makes sure you know that by intercutting his sort of happy family life memories with him committing crimes and shooting people as a pirate. But what I find really interesting with Senor Pink, at least my experience with him, is that I never once felt like, well, that's what he deserves for all the evil things he's done. Like, I'm still somewhat sympathetic to him because he doesn't ever really come across as someone who was trying to deceive Russian. Like, he obviously consciously lied to her, but it didn't seem like it came from a place of, like, deceit, I guess. It's more so he just was caught in a position where he couldn't get himself out of. And he truly did love and care for her and Gimlet. And it seemed like maybe if more time was allowed to pass, he may have given up the pirate life and told her the truth. But obviously, it didn't work out that way. And I think deep down, there is a chance for a good man to be in there because we see that he cares and even goes out of his way to help stray cats, old ladies in need of help, even in the heat of battle. But it's also hard to deny that he does terrible things as a pirate and seems to enjoy it. And this isn't the same as Baby Five, who was essentially manipulated as a vulnerable child. This is a grown man who chose to lead a life like this, as far as we know. I think what I'm ultimately trying to say for now is that while I do think this story and character are very compelling and fun, I think some people forget that this was not a good man that built a happy life for him based on a lie and ruined two other people's lives because of his selfish ways. And I see a lot of people talk about how great of a man Senor Pink is, and yeah, he's a great character, but he's not a good man. He was a bad man, and he paid a high price for it. And I think ultimately, we'll get into a little bit more when we see the final part of his flashback. But yeah, I do think some people are a little too hard on Senor Pink, and then there are other people who aren't hard enough on him. And like, I know probably the majority do land somewhere in the middle and understand that. But yeah, it's funny when you look at like the online discourse of this character, especially, as the years have passed, it's gone to the extremes. Like, oh, like Senor Pink is terrible. Like, we should not be elevating this man. But then there are other people who are just like, Senor Pink is the greatest guy ever. But neither are true, I don't think. I think he does land somewhere in that middle. And that's why this character is so interesting, is because he does fall somewhere in that middle area where it's not quite clear like how you should actually feel about him. And yeah, he has good aspects and he has terrible aspects, and that's kind of like how all people are. There's just good and bad aspects to each person. But that being said, he is a fascinating character and is the perfect foil to Frankie. And we'll definitely get more into the conclusion of this flashback and the fight on the next podcast episode, so look forward to that. But for now, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. If you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. That will definitely help. And check out my Instagram at SunnyGoPodcast for updates when I post new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection. And also, as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye.